Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Westdale Theater's Comedy Film Talk series. My name is Jeff Bender, and this evening I am navigating this flight of comedy with our host and chairman of the board of the Westdale, Mr. Fred Fuchs. Good evening, Fred. How are you?
I'm just fine. Good to see you, Jeffrey. Welcome, everybody.
Before we dive in this evening, just a couple of, first of all, it's great to see so many familiar names attending tonight. So thank you, everybody, for finding some time on this cold, wintry January to talk about the Philadelphia story. We're going to get down to the talk here in just a moment, but just a little bit of housekeeping to begin with. Fred is going to take us through a journey back to 1940 and talk to us about how this film was made and what its significance is in the entire pantheon of comedy in classic Hollywood. But before that, we want to also inspire you or encourage you this evening while you're listening to Fred's talk to look down at the bottom and you'll see a little Q&A section. It's been a while since we've done this. So we just want to remind you that you have an opportunity to type your questions away, and I will take a look at those questions as Fred is preparing his talk and going through this talk to ensure that your voice is heard based on the amount of time that we have available. So without further ado, over to you, Fred. Have a good talk.
Okay, can you drop the...
You got it.
Okay, hi, everybody. Well, as you all know, the Westdale's closed, the pandemic continues. We thought during this period of time, it'd be fun to institute a few new film talks. And of course, we decided to do comedies. I mean, we all could use a good laugh during these dark winter nights. So I hope you've had a chance to see the movie. You know, the Philadelphia Story obviously is one of the most popular films of all time. Many of you may have seen it before. I've probably seen it 10 or 12 times. I know I enjoy it every time I watch it. I'm always taken by the great dialogue and the incredible acting and performances. And hopefully you enjoyed it. You will enjoy it as well. We're going to do 3 other films, His Girl Friday, Sullivan's Travels, Dr. Strangelove, one of my favorites. So anyhow, join us Wednesday nights if you can. Hopefully soon we'll be back in the theater doing these, live with beautiful screenings on our big screen. But meanwhile, here we go. So, I'm sure you've heard me say many times how the stories of how movies get created and put together is often more incredible than the movies themselves. Well, this is certainly an example of that. And really, this is the story of my favorite actress of all time, and that's Katharine Hepburn. She's someone who I discovered, I guess as a teenager when I started watching these classic movies and fell in love with her and her spirit and sort of how unique and original she was, especially for that time in terms of her, her ability to just survive and navigate through the Hollywood studio system, which of course she never really became part of. So, again, just a little bit of context around Katharine and how she became this extraordinary person. She was born in 1907 in Hartford, Connecticut, fairly well-to-do family. And in fact, her mother was a feminist campaigner. She was very involved with the suffragette movement. All the Hepburn children were raised to exercise freedom of speech and debate, and her parents had progressive views and supported her in all her fights against barriers. And of course, she always felt incredibly lucky to have this foundation because, of course, when she became so successful, she was torn, as they all are, in so many different places. And she had this wonderful upbringing. There was one great tragedy, which is that her older brother killed himself. And when he was, I believe, 15, and Hepburn discovered the body. And this was a very, very tragic kind of traumatic moment for her that really impacted her throughout her life. And she became, very much a tomboy, which, she already was. She used to call herself Jimmy and cut her hair really short. And she became a great athlete. In fact, she was in the semifinal of the Kentucky Women's Golf Championship and everything else. But, in fact, she took her older brother's birthday as her own birthday, and she, continued to have that influence throughout her life. Went to, Bryn Mawr University, wound up getting married very young, 21 years old, very wealthy, old money family, Philadelphia family. And this could very easily have been her life, except she did have this passion for acting. And that really drove her more than anything. And the marriage, ultimately dissolved soon after. And she actually did, she was spotted by a big Hollywood agent named Leland Hayward, who represented most of the big stars and actors at all the time. She was in a little play. He asked her to test for a part in a new RKO film called Bill of Divorcement. And she not only got the part, but she soon began a torrid affair with Leland Hayward, who was probably 20 years older than her, but she was only 21 at the 24 at the time. But Hepburn certainly attracted men all through her life, and you can imagine why. Besides being beautiful, she was so smart and witty and independent and just completely unique. And none of these Hollywood studio people had ever seen, anyone had seen anything like this. So she comes out to California in 1932, 25, and she's immediately in a major movie called The Bill of Divorcement, and she's playing opposite John Barrymore. And do we have a slide of that, Jeffrey? Yeah, so there she is, and not intimidated by at all. Barrymore, of course, was one of the great actors and screen stars of his age. And here's this girl standing up to him, completely in her own, and immediately made a huge impact on with audiences and with the Hollywood studios. The director, George Cukor, saw the early screen test for this, the film, and what he had to say about this was, there was this odd creature. She was unlike anybody I had ever heard. Remember, she had that unique accent, which was always which was truly her accent. He particularly liked the manner in which she picked up a glass. I thought she was very talented in that action. So she got the part. The head of RKO was David Oselznick, who was known for discovering new talent, and he took a tremendous chance in casting this unusual actress. George Cukor, of course, who directed the film, became her lifelong friend and colleague. They made 10 films together, and of course, The Philadelphia Story was one of them. Can we see the next slide, please? So here she is again. She actually won an Academy Award for her third movie called Morning Glory. This was the first Academy Award out of 4 that she would win, which is the most any woman has ever won for Best Actress. Meryl Streep only has 3. And then this is a star picture, and you can just look at how unique and her face, her looks, the intelligence in her eyes. These are, just normal publicity stills, but even in these shots, you can see her performance and how much she brings and the charisma. Can we see the next slide, please? Yep. So here she is on the set, the short-haired girl on the left, and there's George Cukor, and that's a film they did together called Sylvia Scarlett, right? Anyhow, she went on to do a number of films, but unfortunately, she started to find she was having box office failures. Can we go full frame, please? And by the mid-1930s, 1937, 1938, her films were not succeeding. Even films like Bringing Up Baby with Cary Grant, which is now revered as a great movie, was not successful. And by 1938, and this is sort of true that this actually happened, Katharine Hepburn was literally labeled box office poison. And nobody wanted her. Remember, she's, 31 at the time, and nobody wanted her, and she was washed up, and of course, she never really got along and played the studio game in the first place, and always was very private about her personal life. Anyhow, she decides, I'm going to buy myself out of my contract with RKO, and I'm going to return to New York, and I'm going to figure it out, and what am I going to do next? So she went back to New York, and she decided to work in Broadway, because she had done very little theater except, right at the beginning. And she talked to a close friend of hers who was a well-known playwright at the time named Philip Barry. Barry had written Holiday and many other great theater and plays. And she was convinced that with a new play she could star in New York, this would help kind of pave her way to getting back into Hollywood. So the play was The Philadelphia Story. If we could see that slide, Jeff. Yeah, and it was an original play, but it was very heavily based on a real woman, a Philadelphia socialite named Helen Hope Montgomery Scott. And she was the wife of Philip Barry's Harvard classmate. And Katharine Hepburn had actually met her when she had been married years before to the wealthy, again, Philadelphia, money. So they actually kind of based it on her, but also, of course, modified the character to help work for the play. But many details, Mrs. Scott had a love of horses. They were actually going to use their mansion, the Scott Mansion in Philadelphia, to shoot the story. But when the studio saw the pictures of it, they said, it's not possible because no one would believe that anybody could live in a house like this in America. It was too grand. And remember, this is the end of the Depression, 1940. And so they rebuilt it all on sound stages. And as grand as it looks in the movie, just imagine that 3 times bigger and more grand even than those sets were. And then, of course, Philip Barry followed Hepburn around and, really molded this Tracy Lord character, copying her mannerism, her actual dialogue, really designing the role to actuate their strengths and downplay their weaknesses. And remember, in Hepburn's case, what the problem was that people had begun to perceive her almost as this, arrogant goddess, sort of above them all and sort of unrelatable and again, not doing the typical Hollywood star activities. It's like you see this all the time. Sometimes even the press, they'll build somebody up and then they just love to knock them down. So they had built her way up and they were taking her down. But of course, Barry uses these traits to humanize, the character Tracy Lord and Hepburn in her eyes. And after the success of this play, and the play was extremely successful, she had, and she very shrewdly had foregone a salary and had taken 10% of the gross of the play instead. And it was a great success, and she made a lot of money from the play. And then, of course, it was obvious to everyone this would be an amazing film. And Hepburn almost didn't get to star in the film at all. David Oselznick had wanted it for Bette Davis. MGM had wanted it for Joan Crawford. But Hepburn was really smart and not sure exactly how the story goes, but she had a lover around this time named Howard Hughes. Again, all the men were always after her. And she slept with Howard Hughes, of course, and Hughes wound up buying the film rights to the play for $30,000, a lot of money at the time, and giving them to Katharine Hepburn as a gift. She says he was a brilliant man and going to bed with him was very pleasurable, but the pleasure of owning the Philadelphia Story lasted longer. So because she controlled the rights, she also had now creative control over the choice of the director, the choice of the actors, was very involved in the production of the film, and again, agreed to make it for no salary in return for a percentage of the profits. And by the time this film came out, she really was quite a wealthy woman in her own right. Now, the story itself, you recognize elements in it. The sort of there's definitely a screwball comedy element. Remember, this was the time, 1940, where screwball comedies were really at their peak. And it uses some of the tropes of the subgenre, you know, warring lovers. And in fact, it uses the basic concept of a remarriage story, which was actually quite popular at the time, because with censorship, the only way you could really have a true, you know, triangle love story like this is that you had to have a couple that had been divorced. So since they had been divorced, it was okay that she could be, you know, attracting this and flirting with this other lover. It's okay that her ex-husband was still around. This was actually used in several films at the time. So, you know, again, all that fast-paced dialogue and everything else we're used to, but there's something so much more in this film. There's a sort of a sentimentality, a sincerity, you might even say sophistication. There's sort of a depth and intelligence to it that really sets it apart from other screwball films of the day. The first choice that she made to work on the film was George Cukor. And Cukor, as I mentioned, had worked with her a number of times. Do we have a slide of him, Jeffrey? Yeah, there he is. There's George on the set working with Katharine and the others. And Cukor was quite amazing because he could do comedy and had done comedy well, but he also had done many great dramas. And he was also one of the only openly gay directors in Hollywood. I mean, when I say openly, not to the public, but within the community. And he was quite well known actually for working with women and making these great women's films with powerful women, you know, in conflict with men, and a wonderful director, and particularly with pace. Again, you know, when I watch this film, the pacing is just absolutely remarkable. And the other thing he did that was so amazing is if you watch the film and think about the reaction shots, you know, because often, particularly with Dexter, you know, the Cary Grant character, they didn't have a lot to say, but their reaction shots really always kept them very close to the film, what they were feeling. Again, very sophisticated editing and storytelling that was, you know, his expertise. He had, you know, worked before translating stage plays to film, getting that balance, as we talked about, you know, working with, you know, an ensemble. It's really quite amazing, you know, how it all works and why Grant's, which is the harder role, obviously, you know, became such a powerful part. The screenplay was actually easy. David Ogden Smith was hired to do the screenplay. Didn't have to do very much, left almost all the dialogue. But he actually won an Academy Award for writing. You know, it was kind of amusing since all he really had to do. In fact, the producer was Joseph Mankiewicz at RKO, who later on made All About Eve, was the writer and director of All About Eve. But what he said to the writer of the adaptation, he gave him a recording of a live performance of the play so he could hear where all the audience response and laughs were, because he wanted to make sure all those laughs stayed in the movie. So that's very restricting to tell a writer when they're trying to write that adaptation. But of course, Stewart wound up winning an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. And Stewart's you know, speech was, "I have no one to thank but myself." So, you know, very funny kind of stuff like that goes on. But here we go, you know, again, Tracy Ward being this sort of alter ego for Hepburn and really created almost kind of this iconic character that in many ways Hepburn drew on for most of her career afterwards, which of course went on to her 70s. Now, interesting, this was not the original cast that Katharine Hepburn chose for this film. Her original choices were Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy, of course, as Mike, and Clark Gable as Dexter, two of the biggest stars at MGM, where the film was going to be financed and distributed. And it would have been her first film with Spencer Tracy, and I think we could all see him and this character, Mike, that Jimmy Stewart wound up playing, but he wasn't available. He was doing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Of course, they went on to make 9 movies together and a love affair for 27 years, basically, though, of course, they never married. Spencer Tracy was a staunch Catholic. He refused to get divorced. It was a very, kind of tumultuous and complicated relationship and life, but that is what wound up happening, but ironically, not starting with this film. Clark Gable also couldn't do it for scheduling conflict, but he never would have done it anyhow because, of course, he and the film's director, George Cukor, hated each other. In fact, Cukor had been the original director of Gone with the Wind and had been fired, when Gable and he couldn't get along. So, of course, they did want 2 big stars to support the film. She wound up with the best, Cary Grant, of course, and Jimmy Stewart. Can we, next slide, please? So Cary Grant doesn't need any introduction. Of course, the greatest, light comedy actor of his time, big movie star. But interestingly, he never won an Academy Award, only 2 nominations. You have to remember in these days, the Academy didn't think of comedies in the same way they thought about dramatic film. And they really thought, as an art form and everything else, they always gave all their attention to the dramas, and very rare that anyone doing comedy would get a nomination or win, and so interesting. But of course, a great character actor, great depth. He always seems, in particular, this sort of secret, where, his motivation is always a little challenging, and he's always plays, in particular in this film, this character who's not afraid to tell the truth. And of course, he's a reformed alcoholic and trying to make amends and trying to, not just stir up trouble, but obviously he has great, care and love for Tracy and feels, the tragedy of his alcoholism, perhaps being, the main reason they broke up. But some of these scenes really become quite dramatic and challenging on a level you'll never hear in a screwball comedy. And for example, there's that great scene where he's talking to Tracy and Dexter says, "You will never be a first-class human being or even a first-class woman until you have learned to have some regard for human frailty." I just love that moment in the film, and that's just, not just great writing, but of course his delivery. He and Hepburn had made 4 movies already together. They had incredible chemistry. The way they kind of, especially in their comedic stuff, bounce off each other, and it's just great moments all throughout this film for her. And of course, there was a lot of question about what would be the first appearance of Katharine Hepburn on the screen after being away for several years, and what would she be doing and what would she look like? And of course, they came up with this incredible first scene. Can we see the slide, Jeffrey? Yeah, with at the front door and where the divorce. And of course, Hepburn has just broken his golf club over his knee, and there is Cary Grant about to shove her in her face and knock her down. And of course, it's sort of a funny, flawed reference to the way the audience had knocked her down, the critics had knocked her down, and she sort of wanted to just play that moment out right at the beginning and get it over with, and then move on to the rest of the show. And ultimately, what is this about? It's the story of this, kind of flawed, arrogant character, who learns some lessons. And this was vastly appealing, to the audience at the time. It was her redemption with the audience. In fact, there were a number of movies being made at the time about, wealthy society people. And, you can think even back to My Man Godfrey. And of course, it was the Depression, coming out of the Depression. And audience just loved to see, these rich socialites. And, they loved to see the clothes and the sets and the jewelry. But they'd also love to see it when they had their comeuppance or in some way, were ridiculed, or the, the hero was the working man, So this was very, very popular, kind of stuff. Next slide. is Jimmy Stewart, of course, and he did everything. He did comedy, he drama, absolutely one of the top actors, really someone who everyone loved and appreciated, and a great human being. Oddly enough, this was the only movie he ever won an Academy Award for. And of course, Mike is wonderful, he's a great character, but it sort of was a surprise, though, many people think he actually won it for the movie he did a year ago, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We'll talk about the Academy Awards later. By the way, Grant got top billing between the three of them. He insisted on being paid $135,000, more than anyone, but it was all donated and paid to the British war effort. He didn't actually take any money for himself. And also remember that, although this was a big Broadway hit, in America, people didn't really know what was going on in Broadway. It wasn't covered the way it's covered now. So when people saw this story on the big screen, they thought, this was completely original play, completely, just something new and fresh to them. The movie was shot in 6 weeks, came in 5 days under schedule. Quite a bit of improvisation went on, and you might notice some of the moments, especially in the incredible scene between Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant at Grant's house, and Stewart gets the hiccups, during the drunk scene, and Grant's laughing so hard, he says, "Excuse me." Anyhow, Cooker left it all in. He wasn't going to reshoot the scene. And Stewart was actually quite nervous at times about this, especially doing the swimming pool scene. He was very worried if he was asked to, appear in a bathing suit, that would be the end of his career. He was quite thin. So, of course, you remember he wears the robe, and then, of course, he has to recite poetry to Tracy. And he was very nervous about doing that as well. And Noel Coward happened to be visiting that set on the day, and he kind of encouraged him by saying, you'll be great. And he was, of course. The fashion, do we have another slide here of some of the, yeah, so Adrian, of course, the incredible costume designer, worked very closely with Hepburn on the styles, the trousers, they were really setting fashion styles, not just for a film, but for the public, the hats that they wore. Hepburn always had a very unique kind of fashion style, and she could be glamorous and wear, ball gowns, and she could pretty much do anything. But that became a big, drawing point of the films, of course, and I believe they got nominated for best costumes. Kate did all her own stunts. Next slide. Of course, this is that great dive, at the swimming pool, and she often did her stunts in all her films, and Adam's Rib, and because she really could play golf, she could play tennis, she was a great sportswoman and incredibly fit and up for most of her life. Next picture. Again, here she is, just absolutely stunning. The boat, of course, you remember the great lines about, oh, she was yar, and there's so much wonderful just dialogue throughout the film, but I'm sure you recognized it, yourself. Next scene. Yeah. And this is that great scene, of course, the only scene of the two of them together. In fact, this is the only movie that Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart ever made together, which is sort of unusual. They both made lots of movies with Hitchcock. They worked with all the same directors. They were never actually in a movie together, except this one, with some improvisation and just, incredible moments for both of them. So, it's a screwball comedy, but it's so much more than that. And I think it's why it continues to be so popular today. Can you show me the next slide, please? Again, here we have Cary Grant, and I don't know. It's just I know we have great actors and actresses today, but we don't have a lot of movie stars. And these stars carried, the audience's love, the audience's passion, from film to film. So even from, the first frame, you knew who this character was in a way. You immediately had empathy. You immediately had feelings for them. It was such a different time. Next one, please. And then, of course, here we have on the flip side what's going on with Mike and Tracy. And, it truly is amazing because you don't really know who she's going to wind up with, do you? I mean, isn't it possible that she's, going to, go off with Mike and has fallen in love? Or, is Dexter really, the person she should and needs to be? It's wonderful how it gets played out in true dramatic fashion. Last slide, please. And of course, ends with this, incredible, wonderful, funny moment, but really, of course, brings this all together and ends with great happiness. And, and as I said, this really became, this persona for Hepburn, independent, sharp-tongued, icy, but ultimately vulnerable. I think it's what people loved about her, for the rest of her acting career. After this film, she went on to do, of course, win 3 more Academy Awards, work until, her late 70s. She won for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. She also won a Best Actress Award for The Lion in Winter. And then her last Academy Award came for On Golden Pond. Can we lose the slides, please? So at the 1940 Academy Awards, it had 6 award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. It won for 2, Jimmy Stewart for Best Actor, and of course, Donald Ogden Stewart for Best Writing Screenplay. Jimmy Stewart did not expect to win and wasn't planning to attend the ceremony. In fact, he was called and at the last minute advised to show up in a dinner jacket. He said he had voted for Henry Fonda for his performance, The Grapes of Wrath. Anyhow, he never felt he deserved to win this award for Philadelphia's Story, and was convinced he was really getting it for playing Jefferson Smith in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington the year before. And that actually does, of course, happen where, people often can get an award, more or less for just a lifetime of work or film they did that wasn't as popular. The film played at Radio City Music Hall. It opened around Christmas time. Giant sellouts before it rolled out to the rest of the country the way they used to do at the time. In fact, it became the highest grossing film of all time at the Radio City Music Hall at this point in 1940, topping Snow White, which had held the record up until this time. It got remade again, a movie called High Society. Do we have a slide for that? Yep, High Society, very successful film with Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, a bit of a musical, some wonderful songs, and Grace Kelly, of course. And this was Grace Kelly's very last role. And as you probably know, she left Hollywood as a huge movie star and would have continued to have had an incredible career, except she decided to become, the Princess of Monaco instead. And that's what we know about her. So anyhow, that's sort of my take on the film, and I hope people enjoyed watching it again. And I'd just love to hear anybody's thoughts about favorite scenes or moments or things has anyone never seen the film before? Was this the first time you saw the film? I'm always curious to hear, what it feels like or plays like. What is this now, 70 years later, and if you still enjoyed it. So, and Jeffrey, of course, if you have any thoughts or questions you want to share or other things that particularly impressed you watching the film this time.
Well, I have to say, you mentioned earlier, the writing is so splendid. And when we can go, where the movie starts off almost with paying homage to those screwball comedies previously with that almost silent film opening, but then switches into this, distance between comedy and then this pathos and romance. They're all so intertwined, and I was really impressed watching it this time. When this screened some time ago at the Westdale, one of the other things I was really amazed by, and unfortunately, watching it on your television just doesn't do as much as it can. But I would certainly challenge people to go back and watch those moonlit scenes between Stewart and Hepburn, and just look at that lighting and consider that it's all done on a sound studio. But there was a cinematographer named Joseph Ruttenberg who was quite popular in his time. He was also won 4 Academy Awards for his works, and the way that he I think it was described, he would paint with light, yeah, and how it creates that moonlit atmosphere. It's so romantic and beautiful.
Yeah, I think I could completely agree. There's something today about seeing these great black and white films because, I forget who it was. I think it's Orson Welles who's, all actors are better in black and white. That, there was something about these films and again, the way they were lit and the worlds that were created, that when they got into using color, it became more real. This is like a dream. It's the Dream Factory. They transport you, and again, larger than life characters, and they're so beautiful and so beautifully lit, as you pointed out, and you can look and pick out all sorts of incredible still shots. And Cooker, of course, was a little more controlled than some directors. He didn't want the audience to be watching the camera, or too distracted from, the story by style. And so less so than some directors. But again, I just think his genius was really more of an editorial genius in his ability to construct drama, construct comedy through editorial reactions, all that kind of stuff. But certainly a superbly directed film, and we'll show more like that.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I'm just wondering if you had any perspectives or opinions about what made him the sort of monumental actor's director, do you think?
Well, I don't know. He was never an actor himself. Often the best actor directors were actors themselves, like, Elia Kazan or, Peter Bogdanovich, were all actors first, right, before they became directors. I don't think that was true for him. He certainly knew the theater very well and drew a lot from the theater in terms of his own films. He wasn't, sort of John Ford or some of these, children of cinema, kind of directors. He really did love the theater and loved writing. I don't know what to say about the coincidence that he was the great woman's director and was, a gay man. Was there some simpatico, understanding of women? Was there something he kind of was able to communicate to these actors and actresses? I don't know. I just know that he was doing something, and you can see it time and again. So it wasn't just like one great movie where he really drew out of these women performances and men as well, obviously, but I don't know.
He just has a real intuition about people, I think, an ability to empathize, and is able to project that on screen. I think
and remember, most of the movies that were being made at this point were very chauvinistic, and women were treated a completely different way in society and at the world at that time. And this why, particularly in this film, to see this incredibly strong and she's not, some scatterbrained heiress, like Carol Lombard in My Man Godfrey. She's a powerful, intellectual, smart, flawed woman who is, trying to protect herself and her facade at all costs. And, isn't that what this is ultimately about, is sort of our facades and how we try to protect them at all costs, and what happens when, people see behind them, and how, we all are flawed and we all have these problems, and how do we, sympathize or empathize with each other. I mean, this is sort of basic human stuff. But again, that was the play, and that's what Philip Barry wrote. And you can't really give Cooker credit for that, but you could give him credit for getting the great performances and crafting, this great film in so many ways, right?
Thanks for answering all those, Fred. We've got some other questions coming in here from, I'm going to say, from Doug Baker and Valerie Clement and Caroline Hill-Smith. They are all very curious to hear what your thoughts are on Tracy Lord's little sister, who's played by the actress Virginia Weidler.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mention any of the character actors, and they're all fantastic, besides the girl and, her uncle and the butler. I mean, every character is magnificent in this play. And I think that's, again, the brilliance of the writing and the brilliance of the director. Take the time to give a little details to them, so they don't become just sort of, one note symbols, that they really are flesh and blood characters, and each have their moment, which is really what, I think was true of, and I forget the little girl's name. What's her name? The character?
Virginia Weidler was the actress's name.
Yeah, but what was the character's name?
Oh, Dinah, excuse me.
Dinah, of course.
Dinah.
Yeah. So, when you think about Dinah, she could have been there just for, a laugh, right? And just been there for comedy relief, but she's actually performs an important function in the movie, in the narrative story, in terms of driving plot forward. And, that's really very unusual. And I think you could say that about several of the minor characters, including, obviously, of course, the great performance by Ruth Hussey. Again, I'm forgetting the character's name, Mike's girlfriend. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Oh gosh, it's. I'm also having that moment. Well, I know her name was Elizabeth. Imbrie, maybe Elizabeth was the character's name.
So great question. I don't know. What did you think was special about this girl? I think she's been in. She went on to have a little bit of a career, but I don't think she made it past 13 or something.
No, I mean, she really kind of hit her stride and wrapped up by the mid-40s, actually. So,
yeah.
But I mean, she was invoking Groucho Marx at times, singing "Lydia the Tattooed Lady," and I mean, she was. But like you said, she almost has this sort of weight to her in the way that she is. Kind of pushing all of the adults that are probably all going through this sort of booze-addled frame of mind throughout this movie. But she's the most grounded character in the film. Let's see, we've got a couple of other.
Again, people comment on how this film feels very modern. It feels much more modern than a lot of those screwball films, and I think it's a tribute to Cooker and the pace of the film. And again, it does slow down at times, and it does allow these side characters to be developed. And it's not just like the movie we're about to see next week, His Girl Friday, just rapid, fast, screwball comedy, fast dialogue, incredible pace. This film has its own kind of, as I like to say, more modern feeling to it.
No, thank you for that. We have an anonymous attendee who felt that the dialogue between Tracy and her father was a little bit creepy. What did you, how he blamed his infidelity as being the result of his daughter not paying enough attention to him. Any thoughts on that, Fred?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I just think that it's hard for us to imagine what the world really was like in 1940. And to really think about the role women unfortunately had in that world, especially in the wealthy socialite world, where men felt all powerful and had affairs and had mistresses, and this was all sort of acceptable behavior. I mean, it was sort of the norm in that society in a way, and so again, I think it's not exactly great character moments, but at the same time, I think it was just sort of some exposition, but looks stranger now from our perspective than probably did from the audience in 1940, maybe.
And I always reasoned that it was because of this interesting or peculiar environment that they all kind of lived in their sort of sheltered worlds. But it also does seem to affect her a great deal to have her be a bit open minded to when she gets to the Stewart scenes ultimately.
Yeah, no, of course, that's the great irony, is that it comes back to you, when you have this kind of prejudice. And in a way, she was, condemning her father and applying her judgment and standards and everything else. And, who's the first to throw the stone,
Yeah,
so.
precisely. Helen Knowles has a comment. It's like Moonstruck. Why do men cheat? Because they fear death. So, Helen.
That's very good. I don't know why men cheat. Women cheat too. I don't know. That's a great, that's the great story that we always are telling. We're trying to understand. What is the nature of love and marriage, and what does it all mean? And as I said, this is unusual because in this period you couldn't have done this story without it being a remarriage story. So if they were shooting this movie today, they wouldn't have had to add the divorce kind of backstory. That was all trying to just please the censors, but it actually made the film more interesting than it was just two men, dating her, or two men, actually three men all trying to, to get her. It kind of, I don't know. I think it ultimately, worked really well.
Yeah, I agree. Linda Di Pietro, who's claimed this is her first time here tonight. Thanks, Linda, for coming. She's watched the film a number of times, yet each time she watches it, it seems fresh, doesn't get old. The storyline is timeless. I wonder what it is about its freshness. Like it does seem like it's perennial.
Well, I think again, it has to do with the tone and sort of the attitude and ultimately the respect, because to watch a film more than once, it could be whatever, great plot, but the plot, so how many times are you going to watch a narrative driven plot movie, right? So then often it can be about great performances like this one, where, it's just so remarkable. You love to watch the moments, as I said, the reaction shots, not when they're talking, not when they're doing something dramatic. Those really give you a sense of sophistication and depth, which makes the film ultimately unusual. But I think it really is this, in this case, it was her, it was Hepburn. And she's just a character you haven't really seen before in movies. And I'm not sure you see in real life because, you might see these socialite, but you don't see behind the curtain. You just see the arrogant, beautiful, gorgeous star, or whoever it is, and the fact that you're seeing behind, that's sort of a more modern thing. So maybe that's why, I don't know. I think it does, emotionally still resonate. You still feel empathy for these characters. And Dexter, is kind of a shit, right? I mean, yeah, he's reformed, but he's bringing these, publicity hounds into this, to destroy his wife's wedding. And it was there was social commentary in the film about the impact of the media and the public. I mean, certainly it's nothing like now, but, it was sort of, foreshadowing a little bit of what really did go on then, but of course now is so much more intense. And so that's another interesting kind of sub story to all of this. And obviously, how Mike feels about, selling out and doing this kind of shit, and there's so much, right?
I just think it's remarkable too that this happened the way that it did. The story you told tonight about how it all came together and how her connections couldn't have hurt it. I mean, like you look at the relationship with Philip Barry, and of course her friendship with Cukor, and naturally Howard Hughes coming into the scene. I mean, all of these things kind of all played very, very well with her. And when she arrives on the screen, this is the Hepburn we know for the next, decade. Basically, it's amazing.
Well,
so she basically recreated.
Very, very smart, and she really wanted to be independent. She never did marry again. She didn't want, she wanted to be able to do what she wanted to do, never be beholden to the studios, never be beholden to anybody really, and believe me, I'm sure there are a lot of very wealthy men like Hughes. She had an incredible a relationship with John Ford. She was John Ford's lover for a couple of years when she first came out, and he was just crazy about her. And they even went and met each other's families. But once again, Ford was a Catholic and wasn't going to get divorced. And it's sad. And she wound up doing it again with Spencer Tracy. And I don't know, maybe that's part of her psychology is, chase men who aren't really available. But, I attribute it to, and that one way or the other, Philadelphia Story or not, this woman was going to continue to be a major Hollywood star and film star and do it her own way. But it is a great little story of how she used this vehicle and intelligently, put it all together and became very rich from this project. She made more money from Philadelphia Story because in those days, actors didn't get a back end. They got their fees and that was it. They were under contract. So, and I don't believe she ever had another contract with the studio after this. I think she only worked independently and, was cast and did great work. And the real testament is that she was still doing it when she was 70 years old.
Right,
I mean, there are a lot of actresses or actors who continued to do it for so long. So
I just love that she immediately recognized that after this movie's success, that I'm going to be able to, consult on the scripts that I want. I can tell, anybody who my leading men are going to be. Hence the reason why Spencer Tracy.
And it wasn't just women. Men didn't have this power either.
That's right.
There were incredible battles that went on. Betty Davis with Warner Brothers and getting out of contracts and trying to control your future. And it was actually Jimmy Stewart who really broke the mold in the mid 50s. He did a film, a Western, where Winchester 73. And it was the first contract that actor actually had a back end. He actually was enough of a star that he was able to make a deal where he had a back end on a film. This was probably late 50s or something like that.
Wow.
So,
I did not know that, Fred. I'm always learning every time.
Yeah. He was, he was interesting. Anyhow, there's so many great stories. So I'm glad you were all able to join us. Now, by the way, keep your eye on the news because there may be some news coming about reopening the theater. Who knows when? I can't tell anything with this Doug Ford guy, but supposedly there's an announcement coming. Otherwise, I hope you're all safe and watching good movies. Obviously, there are a lot of great Academy, award. The nominations are coming out, I think, in about a week or two. And if you haven't seen some of those, well, I'd like to say come down to the West Tail, but we'll see. Hopefully, if we reopen, we will try to get some of the great ones. Power of the Dog, and some of the Licorice Pizza. And try to give you a chance to see them on the big screen before the awards happen.
But before that, let's not forget this time next week. Come back, join us for His Girl Friday. Watch the movie first, and let's come on back. And Fred, my challenge to you for next week is, can you speak as quickly as Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant?
Well, you'd have to tape me and then speed it up afterwards. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Take care.
Thanks, Fred. Good night.
Bye-bye.